This is autoethnography, assemblage, and the lived research subjectivity of hiking alone. And we start with a video.
I'm really proud of myself because I came up all these rocks just now. Big scramble. What a view, what a place, what a feeling. Oh, so good. It's 8 in the morning. I'm in Arches National Park. Hiking by myself on the primitive trail, which is part of the Devil's Garden. And yeah, it's cold. It's like about 2 or 3 degrees. But it's beautiful, and the light's amazing. I'm really unfit, I'm really fat, and I'm doing it anyway, and I feel really good.
Hiking alone feels simple. Go somewhere and walk there. But in this paper, I want to dig into what we think we know. Specifically, this presentation is about the co-production of subjectivities when we hike, in inverted commas, alone. Although the whole point is that only one human body physically sets off from the trailhead, I want to talk about the intercorporeality that undergirds the event and how assemblages of the human and the non-human come together to make hiking alone possible. Methodologically, there's a lesson here for autoethnography, because what happens if the auto at the centre is rather more imbricated and fleeting than we thought? What if experience and meaning are events rather than fixities? What happens when others see the same story differently, and if we ourselves see things differently later too? Just how stable is the story, its meanings, but also the rational individualistic subject at the centre? Indigenous and Pacifica scholars have centred instead the relational, and new materialism forces focus onto entanglements with discourses, with human and non-human others, and with power. When I think about hiking alone, I think of the non-human parts of the assemblage that makes it possible, and I start with my red boots, magic boots. They've never given me a blister. Then, for camping alone and getting to trailheads, I have Vanessa, my camper van, and her little sister, Susie Tent. Immediately then, am I hiking alone? John Urry frames within mobilities the tangible and intangible affordances that make movement possible or not, and the boots, the van, and the tent are tangible affordances. But the intangible matters too. Social imaginaries form us about what a legitimate hiker looks like, and although none of us is getting a handwritten invitation from Mother Nature, the baggage of being an unlikely hiker is something well documented in online activism, and this is something I've written about before. Because, you see, I'm a fat hiker, and the discourses around that are powerful. These are some of the things that I've heard on the trail. And although I've been fat and I've been hiking for years, these imaginaries and the comments have been part of the materiality of affect, a powerful hauntology that hikes alongside me. As Erin Manning describes it, take the example of a snake in the context of a phobia. Wandering through the desert, everything is felt as the force of snakeness. There's no rustling that does not elicit fear. But this is fear even before it can be defined. It's the edginess of pace, the tenseness of posture. It alters how each step is taken. Every quick movement, lizard, wind, fly, activates a certain bodying that attends intensively to an environment in the making. If snake phobia is replaced with awareness and politics and non-representation, this describes how it feels to hike alone. And in this paper, I want to consider a particular kind of hiking, which is bothying, and in particular, bothying alone. Bothies are predominantly ex-agricultural buildings, positioned in remote land and now used for access to the outdoors. Often maintained by the Mountain Bothies Association, these buildings are basic and free to use, offering essential shelter to walkers and climbers. There are around 100 such former agricultural buildings in use in Scotland as bothies. And bothy culture has grown up around them. Bothying encapsulates a coming together of strangers in a place of refuge, usually in a remote landscape. Bothying is associated with firelight and whisky, mountain days and bothy nights, spaces shared with strangers, and never knowing quite who you're going to meet. Bothying is becoming accessible. A recent glut of books and websites give exact coordinates for the NBA bothies, and this has resulted in changes to bothying culture, because bothying has historically been an insider pursuit. Writing about bothying, Andy Samuel, formerly of Abertay University, cites train spotting as an example of those from the inner cities who do not have the correct relationship with wild land, suggesting that the NBA employ an education officer to teach them. This, of course, is heavily classed. While the MBA is run by retired middle-class school teachers, Brown and Mitchell write that the working class approach to bothies is rather more hedonistic. This came to a head during COVID-19, when people could no longer go to Shagaloof, and many discovered bothies, brought booze and trashed the place, cutting down fences and trees for firewood and leaving literal shit all over the place. One response from the Ardnish estate was to take back control from the NBA and add steel doors and window covers to Pinminach Bothy, locking it up except to paying guests, one group at a time, who have to register through a website. The estate manager, interviewed for The Scotsman, laments that the ease of finding information about bothies has the wrong sort of person. The wrong sort of person may be women. Phoebe Smith writes, "When I arrive at a bothy in a storm, or rarer yet in sunshine, I can't simply switch off, safe in the knowledge that all potential dangers have been overcome. I have to consider who'll be inside already and how many of them. Who might arrive later? Will I be safe sleeping in their company? I scope the building out automatically without thinking for escape routes, and on entering I work out where to place my sleeping bag, usually a spot from which I can see the entire room and where I won't be boxed in by late arrivals." And here I am, not about to trash a bothy, but nor with any kind of pedigree of being in the know. My parents never went hiking, they'd never heard of bothies before I told them. Twice before this year, I'd been to bothies, once on each of 2 trips with male friends, to Knoydart and Kintail. This meant that in August last year, 2022, setting off from Ardnish on the Isle of Raasay, I was setting out for bothy number 3, and for the first time, I was going bothying alone. I carried my camping gear in case I didn't find the bothy, and I set off along an old track that used to lead to the tiny village school in Torrin. The going was sometimes easy, Lewisian gneiss and sheep trails between the heather, but mostly I slopped through peat bog. I saw a solitary antlered stag high on a ridge and kestrels circling above, but mostly I saw midges, the tiny biting insects that plague the Highlands on still summer days. Then, after a few hours, I found the bothy and I stayed overnight. Take a look.
This is the inside of the bothy, which I had to myself last night. It's a little bit echoey. There's a skylight up there. Somebody's having a torch, but there's no electricity, so there's no light. Really, there's a fireplace, obviously. That's where I cooked last night. And this is where I slept. A little sleeping platform, a guitar, which I cannot play, and I wish I could. Some river water, didn't need that, luckily. And a whole load of stuff, including, these are pretty fascinating, the bothy book, which goes back to the early 90s. This is the first bothy book, and it's got stuff going back to 96, January 96. Yeah.
As you saw, there are no toilet facilities in bothies, and in the dead of night when I went outside to pee, My head torch picked out the glowing eyes of deer all around me, them grazing, me gazing, scared at first, all of us, and then filled with the thrill of the moment, just me and wild deer, tens of miles from the next nearest human. There I was, truly bothying alone. I spent hours the next morning reading the old bothy books, full of creativity. Rachel Hunt writes that bothy books are the commingling of people and place, in which environments are continually made and remade, and they are. But besides human creativity in the bothy books, there is also non-human agency, such as here, where we see the creative agency of hungry mice. Also present, beside the mice, the deer and the seals, were ticks, and I detached about a dozen before I went to sleep. Do mice and ticks have agency? What about horses? On one walk, I met horses along the way, and from another walker, I heard that they'd tried to mug him for his sandwiches. Horses surely have agency. And midges. Here's a bothy book entry written from the perspective of an agentic midge. I'd like to say thank you from the bottom of my small heart for the continuous upkeep of this fantastic stopping place, which has, most deliciously, provided a never-ending supply of fresh blood. Yours most graciously, a midge. It certainly feels like have agency, and they were very clear on what they wanted, which was to bite me. Take a look.
There are a lot of midges. It's really pretty here. But my God, there's a lot of bugs. I'm absolutely slick with smidge, midge repellent, which I think is probably the best of them. I've tried all the others. And wow, there's a lot of midges. But otherwise, it's very beautiful here. Take a look. But yeah, take a look at all these. Can you see them? Plenty of midges. Plus it's sunny, which is lovely, but it's very, very still. And I'm right next to water. As you can hear probably, those trees there. And the sun's setting, and did I mention it's got a lot of midges? There's a lot of midges around.
So midges have agency, and the animals have agency. Wait, does the bothy itself have agency? What about a peat bog? Jane Bennett would say that they all do. Certainly all of them are parts of the assemblage that saw me at the north end of Raasay, hiking, in inverted commas, alone. And then later, I looked up the Torran area of Raasay in the National Library of Scotland and found a local history. And in it, there's a description of Black Norman, whose house became the bothy. I'm not sure whether he was illiterate or not, but he certainly could not write a letter, and I don't think I ever heard him speaking in English. He must have been a strong pipe smoker, because when his usual quota of tobacco didn't arrive on time, he could be seen and heard shouting and singing, if you could call it that, Gaelic songs or even psalms. Completely uninhabited, the north end of Raasay was once people's homes. So another part of the hiking alone assemblage is the history of the area and the history of the wider Highland clearances, where the Highlands were violently emptied from the 1750s to the 1860s. Fast forward, I spent the rest of 2022 bothying as much as possible to Pinminach, Curvaig and Glencool. As the weather got colder, I carried in kilos of firewood so that I could have a proper bothy experience of sitting around a fire with strangers, spinning a yarn and drinking whiskey. I did hear some of the hiker status establishing bullshit that I'd heard before about what a great mountain man he was, always a he, and how surprising it was that someone like me should be out here doing this. But as I've written elsewhere of hiking in Australia, as a fat woman hiking alone in my 40s, I understood that hiking was something of an incongruous act, seditious even, and I calmed these strangers' worries with conscious performances of expertise and swagger, describing other harder hikes I'd done before and demonstrating in conversations about gear that in fact, I absolutely knew what I was doing. Trail status is like road status, and I hammed it up, performing and posturing, putting them at ease, very aware now of what I was doing. But it wasn't always this way. At Glencool, I also met a German woman called Marie, and we talked and talked. And later we connected on Facebook, and since then we've been emailing back and forth. All of this, the fireside hangouts and the trail status conversations, and the connecting to people in person and online, sounds very unlike hiking alone, but this too is part of the complex subjectivity of aloneness. One more story. I was reading a lot online about bothies by this point, and I read about the secret bothy. There were no directions, not even an indication of a rough area, but there was a picture. I squirreled away this information, not recognising the mountain, but thrilled somehow at the idea of a secret bothy. Then I took a week off work to vagabond a little in the Highlands before winter properly set in. One day in the middle of nowhere, I pulled a van over to look at a pretty view. And then I noticed on the other side of the road a mountain that looked half familiar. The secret bothy photo swam back into the conscious reaches of my mind, and I said to myself out loud, because why go alone if you're not going to talk to yourself? Holy shit, I think I've found it. I found the screenshot on my phone, compared it to what I was seeing. Could it be? I took a picture and sent it to my friend Daniel. This, I showed him what I was seeing, is this, I showed him the screenshot, right? The mountain was wearing a Santa hat of cloud, but Daniel agreed that it looked very similar. Maybe this was the way to the secret bothy. I packed up my overnight stuff and set off at a trot, because there was only about 2 hours of daylight left, and I found it. I cautiously knocked on the door. Hello? But it was a weeknight out of season, and I was completely alone there. I'd set off in such a hurry, though, that I didn't bring my usual firewood, and in the dying light I collected twigs and branches. But then in the kitchen, I found a gift, a bag of coal with a note saying to enjoy the place. Unlike the Spartan MBA bothies, the secret bothy was much quirkier, full of artifacts from times gone by, and I got a cosy fire going. Apparently I was staying over. Later I looked up the history of the area, and the house is a post-clearance shepherd's house from the 1830s. There are traces of human habitation in this area going back thousands of years, but it all stops abruptly in the 1830s when the Sutherlands cleared the land of crofters to make way for sheep. They became some of the early free settlers to Australia, which is also where I'd been living for 15 years, and much later. Scotland and Australia traces a line on a map, their journey, my journey, and although the people of this area were long gone, I wondered if there are ghosts. Certainly, just behind the house, there's an old cemetery which I'd walked through as I was looking for the bothy. Picture me, therefore, a whisky in an armchair by the fire in a spooky wee house, thinking about ghosts. I read the bothy book, which showed a month or more between visits, even in summer. There was also a bit of a ghost story in the bothy book. Take a look. I don't believe in ghosts, but strange things happen. Was sitting in here eating dinner about 6:30 last night when there was a noise of someone upstairs. I was on my own. Also saw 2 head torches about 1 kilometre west heading this way when I went out to brush my teeth, and around 7 p.m. However, nobody had come along by the time I went back to bed after 8 p.m. In this half-forgotten cottage, the fire burned down and sent crazy light dancing around the room, and I climbed into an actual bed, which is something you never usually find in bothies. It was a cold slab of damp, and I put my camping mat between my sleeping bag and it, and was so much more comfortable than the usual thing, which is either a floor or a hard wooden sleeping platform. And so I lay there alone in the secret bothy, thinking about all the ways in which I was not alone, not even slightly alone. This all makes me think that what I call hiking alone is a series of complex assemblages, a series of events that make us question what aloneness really is. How much was going alone a subjectivity predicated on and co-produced by the histories of bothies, the human and non-human others that we meet out there, the materialities of affect that I brought with me, and the complex tangible and intangible mobilities affordances that make it all possible. And what does this mean for the writing of autoethnography if the auto at the centre of it all is so continually co-constructed by the rest of the assemblage event? I'll leave you to think about these questions the next time you find yourself walking alone.